I was always very entrepreneurial. I was that annoying kid at school that was trying to sell you stuff. I then progressed to starting a business when I was about 14. I used to have a market stall at the weekends selling watches and jewellery, and actually that became quite a big business. I started wholesaling watches and jewellery and other things to other market traders. So I ended up leaving school when I was 15 to pursue this business. And obviously the day you know most about business is the day you start. Yeah, that's when it all looks really easy. So I had a good lesson in humility quite early on when that business failed when I was 19 years old, which I think is a really useful exercise to go through. If no one's ever failed, then I recommend highly doing it. Or they might be lying. From there, I basically moved on to a telecoms business that I started over in the UK. That business grew very quickly, but I found growing a business really, really hard. Sales and marketing only worked 50% of the time if I was lucky. Salespeople always performed a little bit less than you hoped they would. The forecasts were always much better than the actuality. And actually, if you ask an economist about profit, they have a really interesting take on it, which is basically in a perfect free market, profit doesn't exist. You only get a risk-weighted return on your investment, and your investment is normally your time. So what happens in most businesses is they don't work, and in the businesses that do work, you put all of the time and effort in. If you added up what that time and effort is worth and added a percentage because it's a bit riskier than sticking it in a bank, that's basically what you end up getting back at the end of it when you sell the business or when you take money out of the company. So that's not very inspiring, is it, in terms of how do you grow your business and how do you add real shareholder value? How do you do stuff? Most people started their business because they wanted, more time and more money. They wanted to feel reward, feel successful, feel like they'd achieved something. So I always thought the way to be successful was you started a business and then you work really hard. You pour everything into it, and that's what I did. I poured my blood, sweat, and years into the businesses that I started. And certainly in that telecoms company, you sacrifice your health, you sacrifice relationships, you sacrifice all sorts of things in order to be successful. And I sometimes think, when you look at the 80% of businesses that don't succeed, maybe they don't succeed because people just aren't willing to make the sacrifices to be in the 20%. But again, that's quite a depressing thought when you look at it that way. Funnily enough, Daniel Priestley, who you just mentioned, sent me a photograph this morning. Well, it was obviously last night because he's in the UK. But he sent me a photograph this morning of my first ever Harbour Club that I did back in 2009. And I was really fat. I was really unhealthy. I look terrible in that. I look better now, 6 years later, than I did in 2009. And that was because I was still in this phase of pouring everything into the businesses I was doing and sacrificing everything else to have that success. Now, what's really interesting is that when you start a business and work really hard, you can obviously have a degree of success. But when you get to a certain size, particularly in an industry like telecoms, you pop on the radar of lots of other telecoms companies that would like to buy you. And the reason other telecoms companies would like to buy you is they don't want to go through all the shit you've just been through trying to grow the business. They want to just add your customers and your profit to their business. If you think about two telecoms companies, they've got two of everything. There's two offices, two accounts departments, two customer service departments, but they don't need two of everything. So by putting the two together, 2 + 2 can equal 6. So they get that uplift in putting the two businesses together. So basically, I've always preferred having meetings to actually working. So I met with lots of these companies that were trying to buy my business. So my every week was punctuated with at least 1 or 2 of these meetings discussing them acquiring my company. And a funny thing they all seem to have in common is that none of them really wanted to pay me any money. Well, certainly nothing up front. They weren't going to give me enough to be able to run for the hills and or go and buy a Lamborghini and a yacht in Monaco. So what I was faced with was all these clever deal structures that were basically jam tomorrow or something like that. So basically I went 360 degrees in my own head and thought, hang on, I haven't got any money, maybe I could buy a business. Just because I think they command some sort of respect, I should be on the other side of this desk. And so basically I shifted the conversations I was having to more collaborative conversations. And actually what happened in that instant was something really, really interesting. Historically, I think I'd been a business runner, and I converted myself into being a business owner. And a really interesting thing happens when the quality of your conversations increase. So how it used to go previously was I'd come to a meeting like this, or I'd go to a meeting with some other company, and the first thing I would think would be, how many mobile phones have they got? How much do they spend on their airtime? Can I get them as a customer? You know, I was a fucking salesperson, nothing more really, was I? But I called myself a business owner. What happened when I decided that I was going to look for an acquisition is that my conversations turned to me being an investor, an acquirer, a merger, looking for joint ventures. In fact, I now say to people, look, if your day should basically be looking for mergers, looking for acquisitions, looking for exits, and looking for joint ventures. And if you're doing anything else, you're just running a business. You have a job. You're not a business owner. And making that transition from being business runner to business owner, I really think is the next step on the entrepreneurial ladder. Now, you don't have to take it. Running a business can be really fulfilling. And lots of people really enjoy that area. In fact, 70% of all businesses stay in that area for their entire life. But I also think that instead of having 1 year's experience 20 times over, it might be nice to have 20 years experience. It might be nice to move up that entrepreneurial ladder and to move on to the next steps of things that are achievable or doable out there. So basically, I got a few slaps around the face trying to put deals together with no money. And by the way, I really had no money. I mean, growing a telecoms company fast when you didn't have any capital to start with is a really dumb idea. It's probably one of the most capital-intensive businesses you can go into, because you basically buy subscribers. So you invest a load of money up front, and then you get somebody that pays you a little bit of money every month. So the better month you have, the less money you have. So really painful business to grow when you're undercapitalized. So we were always, I describe it as robbing Peter but never quite paying Paul, you know, in terms of the expansion tactic. And I remember the time when I was looking to buy a company, I had a choice of paying my credit card bill or the wages at the end of the month. So it wasn't like a choice of, oh, I've got plenty of money, I'm going to go and buy a business. It was really hand-to-mouth kind of stuff, which I'm sure anyone that's run a business can probably relate to. So I went around, and you have to kiss quite a few frogs before you find your princess. But I eventually found someone at a networking meeting, not a lot different to this kind of environment. And just like Gina said, I walked in and I said, I'm a telecoms company, and they said they're a telecoms company, which normally would have led to us scurrying to the opposite corners of the room and making sure we spoke to different people and getting really jealous when they spoke to the same person I was just speaking to, because I'm sure they're trying to find out how many mobile phones they've got. So I pivoted that conversation to, really? We're looking to either merge or acquire or invest in another telecoms business. And that led into a meeting where I found out this person had several motivations, really big motivations that made them want to get out of their business. One of them was it only made about 15,000 a year, even though it had 1,000 customers. All the overhead cost was basically made them a bit borderline in terms of their ability to succeed. The other one was literally their office was about to be bulldozed. Their lease expired in a couple of weeks, and literally bulldozers were coming to demolish the whole thing and build a block of flats. So in his mind, he had to find a new office lease. He had to pay a quarter's deposit and a quarter's rent up front, and then a bit of refitting costs. So in his mind, he had a kind of 50 grand or 70 grand, I think he'd decided it was going to cost of moving. Plus, he had another business that was way more interesting, and entrepreneurs always have something that's more interesting than the thing they're doing now, the shiny new thing syndrome, I would call it. To cut a long story short, I was able to construct a deal with him to get the business into my name before the 2 weeks expired, and without having to give him any of the money up front. And without any bank loans or anything like that. And basically, I grew by a year's worth of sales in an afternoon. So instead of having to invest money in, we didn't have Google AdWords then, but imagine you invested money in Google AdWords. You don't know how many of those will turn into leads. You don't know how many of those leads turn into sales. You don't know how many of those sales would have just come into the business anyway, whether you had the salesperson or not. This was a guaranteed extra 1,000 handsets added to my business overnight. And I had an epiphany. I remember driving home from that meeting with the signed letter in my hand. I didn't have a lawyer, so I'd literally written a letter transferring the business to me. I remember driving back and just having this epiphany. You don't need to run the marathon. You can just run the last 10 yards and you still get a medal. This guy had been running the business for 13 years. I just bought 13 years of someone's life. Well, bought in a very tenuous sense, because there wasn't actually any money transacted. But it was a complete game changer from my perspective. So I then went on to grow that business through acquisition over the next 18 months, and ended up with a group of 12 companies turning over £13.5 million, which is about 30 million Singapore dollars, in revenue and 135 staff, all within an 18-month period. So it was a really explosive growth. All of those deals done with almost no money down, a few thousand on a couple of occasions, but never more than £15,000. So all done on really low amounts of money down. All these companies had great brands, they had great relationships, they had great customer bases. They just had motivations that meant that they needed to do something. The next epiphany I had was basically when having 135 staff, by the way, is all the worst things about a business. People use that like it's a boast or it's a good thing, but we all know business would be wonderful if we didn't have staff and customers. So the business owner mentality, by the way, is where you shift your customer focus. So I want you to be customer focused, but your customer isn't the person that buys your product. Your customer is the person that buys your business. So think about who is the person that's going to ultimately end up buying your business, because that's where you really create your wealth. That's where you create your freedom, your time and your money that we spoke about at the beginning. So yeah, focus on only doing things that benefits that end customer. And basically the second epiphany was I sold the company. In 2006, I sold the core telecoms business. Actually had another business at the same time go bust, which was a wonderful lesson, because the other business was the one I decided to keep. And you know why I decided to keep it? Because it had a 3-year contract with the world's largest insurance company. So that was the reason why I decided this is the one I would keep. It was making loads of profit and had this amazing contract. What's the reason I should have sold it? Because it had a 3-year contract with the world's largest insurance company. Every reason you can think of for keeping your business is the reason you should sell it. Next year going to be your best year ever? The buyer's going to love that. And by the way, every entrepreneur I've ever met, next year is going to be their best year ever. So it's a fairly consistent idea. So the biggest, world's largest insurance company, by the way, was AIG. So we know what happened there. So the business that supplied AIG, I ended up closing down. I should have sold it with the 3-year contract with the world's largest insurance company. And the telecoms company I sold. And what I realized about selling was you don't necessarily just sell for the money. Of course, the money is important. It gives you choices and freedom, and you make much better decisions when you've got money. And it gives you the time to make those decisions as well. You don't make those kind of hurried, pressured decisions that you make when you absolutely have to pay stuff at the end of the month. But the thing it really gives you is your time back. You don't realize how much you invest in this business in terms of your own personal time. And actually, an entrepreneur with time and money is really dangerous. You can really do some things. Sometimes in a negative way, because you often find they buy a big boat, get divorced, and all those kind of things. But in a really positive way as well. When you've got the time and the money to invest in the next thing, and also the experience that's come from doing the business last time, you can be really, really powerful. And if you approach your next venture as a business owner as well, without all those emotional ties connected with your first startup, because it's always a bit of a first baby thing when you have a business. If you can come at it in a more emotionally detached way and look at it as a business, so focus on having more money coming in than going out, and all the things that you should do in a business. It just gives you a much more mature approach. In fact, just about any business that's in trouble can be fixed by anybody else. It just can't be fixed by the person that founded it and the person that's running it. So having that objectivity going into your next venture is a really, really important thing. So basically, after I sold that business, that was my second epiphany. You don't make money running businesses, you make money when you sell them. And I know it's not all about money, but believe me, it does help. And you certainly can't help the poor by being one of them. So, so it's important to transition and to move up that ladder. I then went on to buy and sell lots of companies. So I realized that obviously if I have a methodology for acquiring businesses without using capital, I may as well acquire businesses. And if you make money when you sell them, I might as well sell them pretty much straight away. So I went through a period over 5 or 6 years of just buying and selling businesses, and I transacted about 50 companies in that time, aiming never to keep businesses longer than about 4 months. Doesn't always work. I had a few one I kept for 10 years and one I kept for a year, but I was exit focused, just learning lessons as I went. Quite a few of them I screwed up. Hadn't learned a lot of lessons along the way. In 2009, I started teaching people how to do it. So I run a course called the Harbour Club, where I get a group of 10 people together and I take them through how to grow their own business by acquisition, how to find opportunities, because the sourcing is kind of key, how to put the deal structures together so that there's no money involved, how you fix a business if it is in a distressed kind of situation, and then how you exit it quickly and for the best value. So again, learned lots of very tactical tricks as I've gone along. And over the 6 years that I've been delivering that course, it now contains more and more content, but squeezed into the same 2 days. So now I just talk really fast, and we go through lots of case studies and all that sort of stuff. More recently, we've started to look at the topic of shareholder value. So I have an office here, an organisation called Unity Group. We have an office here, which actually I'm an investor in KPI and a friend of Daniel Priestley's. And we share an office with KPI here in the Marina Bay Financial District. We also have an office in London, one in New York and one in San Francisco. And we help small to medium-sized business owners extract value from their business. The problem with being a shareholder in a small business is you don't make money until you sell it, and that sale is a bit of a binary decision. You either sell it or you don't. You can't kind of sell a bit of it. Or if you take on investment, the investor wants to invest in your growth, not in a Porsche. It's trying to come up with a scenario that creates freedom for the entrepreneur. And basically, we've come up with a model for collaboratively publicly listing small to medium-sized businesses. So a small to medium-sized business on its own doesn't have the scale to be able to do an IPO, to list on the stock market. But if you get together with a group of like-minded people, then you possibly do. So we facilitate a structure that brings competitors around the same table and makes them collaborative partners. And we then take them through the process of publicly listing. And what that does is it massively drives the value of your shares, because the two biggest drivers for share valuation is scale. Bigger companies attract a bigger valuation, and liquidity, that ability to buy and sell your shares when you want. The reason small companies get small valuations is because if you invest in them, it's very hard to get your money back out. You have to wait for the entrepreneur to give up, die, or sell before you can exit. So using the public markets, using stock markets, we can create that liquidity for people. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I wanted to share some ideas on collaboration, on networking. I hope you see the idea of going and having a higher level of conversation instead of just looking for customers. Look for the opportunities to get real scale, and real scale comes from partnerships or mergers or acquisitions.